Okay, we got some. I'm good to go? All right. Good morning. Good morning, Rita. Huh? Okay. I'm doing good. Yourself? Are going up to Ohio? Illinois. Up where it's cooler. Yeah. Oh, wow.
That's all right, dear. That's okay, honey. No, I haven't seen him in 5 years. So
Wow. That's a while.
the older I get, you never know when I can be able to do it again.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I'm old as an age, so I'm not getting any younger.
None of us are. Good morning. We're going to kind of pick up where we left from last week. Last week we had where Christ had gone to Capernaum, and he had talked to the disciples, and he had talked to the crowds that followed him, and he talked to the Jews. The Jews complained and said, "How come your disciples eat and they don't cleanse themselves before they eat?" And this is what he said. "You hypocrites, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you." So he's directly talking to the Pharisees and the scribes that have followed him up to Capernaum. "This people honors me with their lips, but with their hearts is far away from me. But in vain they do worship me." So he's pretty direct as far as how they are and what he thinks of them. And let me go ahead to where we were. It was in 20. And the disciples came and said to him, "Do you know the Pharisees were offended when they heard this statement?" It's kind of like, so? I told them what they were. If they were offended, they should be offended by the way they do things, not by what I said. Because I said the truth. What were they doing? What were they supposed to be doing, and what were they doing? What were the Pharisees and the scribes supposed to be doing, and what were they actually doing? They were mocking him. But what was their job? Yeah. Well, yeah. They were supposed to bring people closer to God. And what they were doing was they were taking people farther away from God by the things they did. So that's why he called them hypocrites. You're doing the exact opposite of what you think and you tell everybody you're doing. I'm trying to bring you closer to God with all these rules. It didn't bring anybody closer to God. It brought everybody away from God. So why'd they try and tell them what they told them? Why did the disciples say, "Hey, you might want to back off on that a little bit. You offended them"?
Well, they knew how powerful they were, and they didn't want to draw negative attention. They wanted these little nice little, they are big guys in town.
Yeah, when you take over things, you're going to need these guys, okay? You want to bring them into your fold and everything like that. He wasn't thinking that way. They didn't really understand. They were still thinking about earthly kingdoms. And part of that was going to be the Pharisees and the scribes. They didn't understand where it was headed. So what's the plan he's talking about? But he answers that, "Every plant which my heavenly Father did not plant shall be uprooted. Let them alone." Right. But he's going to pull these plants up. But he's going to pull this plant up. What is this plant? It's the Pharisees. It's all the rules they've put in place. That's the plant he's going to throw away. He's going to pull it up. He's going to say, "I didn't plant that. I didn't put all those rules in place. The rules you got were through Moses. They're written in Deuteronomy. They're written in Leviticus. But all that stuff, I didn't write that stuff." Okay, I've already talked about that one. So, the heart of man. Peter said to him, explain the parable to us. Jesus said, are you still lacking understanding also? So remember I talked about it last week, is he's kind of frustrated at this point. He's been preaching for 1.5 years, probably close to 2 years. And he says, you still don't understand? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated? But things that proceed out of the mouth from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witnesses, slanders. These are the things which defile the man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man. Jesus went away from there and withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon. So the whole thing started when the Pharisees and scribes says, how come they don't cleanse themselves before they eat? Of course, it was a ceremonial one where you wash, and the water's got to drip off your elbows and everything like that, and it's got to be done per their rules. And it doesn't mean that they didn't take some water or something like that and try and get any dirt that may have been on their hands. It's to say, you don't understand. They just accused us of all being sinners because we didn't follow the rules. And they're saying, you're unwashed. You're defiling yourself because you didn't wash right. And he says, it's not what goes in, it's what comes out. And he goes back to the heart. It's based on your heart. And that's, Christianity is based on your heart. Matt's going to teach this week on 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is about the heart. And it talks about love, faith, and joy. But the greatest among these is love. Love is your heart. If you don't love God, if your heart is not after God, you're not going to serve Him very well. And eventually, at some point, you're going to quit because your heart isn't into it. David was explained as a man after God's own heart. He did a lot of things wrong, but he was always repentant when somebody pointed it out to him. Sometimes they had to knock him in the head kind of hard, but he was always repentant of what he'd done because he was a man after God's own heart. And God loved him because of why David did what he did. He came to God and he trusted in God because his heart was after God. And that's what Christ is trying to tell him here. He says, it's your heart. It's about what comes out of what motivates you. You know, the heart drives what you desire, drives what you do. If you desire to serve God, you're going to do godly things. If you desire to serve yourself, you're probably going to do some ungodly things. So, the parable he's talking about was when he talked about what defiles goes in, you didn't wash, etc. Already talked about that. Okay, so he's gone to Tyre and Sidon from Capernaum. Capernaum is in Israel. What's Tyre and Sidon like? Anybody know? It's up northwest of Israel. It's pagans. Huh?
From Sidon.
Yeah, Jezebel came from Sidon. Okay, so it's pagan worship. It's pagans. There are no Jews there. So he's going somewhere outside of where he's been preaching for the last 1 to 2 years. Jesus got up and went away from there to the region of Tyre. And when he had entered a house, he wanted no one to know of it. Yet he could not escape notice. But after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Why did he go to Tyre? What's he been doing up until now? Preaching and healing. 24/7. When he's gotten in the boat and gone across the Sea of Galilee, or when he's walked around, sometimes what did he try to do? What did he try to do sometimes? Be alone. He's whooped. If he's been doing this 24/7 for up to 2 years, he's tired. He needs a rest. He needs some peace and quiet. Not people clamoring after him. I want this, I want that. You did this wrong, you did that wrong. He wants a little bit of peace and quiet. How persistent was the woman? This is easy. Yeah, she was after him. Let's see. She kept asking him. It's going to get a little bit more specific. In Matthew, not out of Mark, because I was teaching out of Mark, out of Matthew, and a Canaanite woman came from the region, came out and began crying out, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed." And he did nothing. He did not answer her word. And his disciples came and imploring him, saying, "Send her away because she keeps shouting at us." So she just wasn't asking. She was shouting. She was yelling, "Please, please, heal my daughter." Over and over and over and over again. So why'd she have to persist so vehemently? I spelled that word right the first time, so I figured I'd say it. Huh?
She was not a Jew.
She was not a Jew. She was a Gentile. He didn't come
just seeking faith.
for the lost sheep of the Gentiles at this point. He came for the lost sheep of Israel. He came to preach to those in Israel. He went there because it was pagans, and he didn't expect anybody would bother him or ask him for anything. And up until this point, he's ignoring her. Does it remind you of a story? Remember when he ate the Pharisee's house? A woman came. I don't think she was a Jew. We'll get to that. And he was saying to her, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And you know who they're referring to as the dogs. But she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "Because of this answer, go. The demon has gone out of your daughter." Going back to her home, she found the child lying on the bed. The demon had left, having left. So what's his initial response? He responds to the disciples who say, "Send her away. Do something." So what's his initial response?
Basically, it's like it's not the right time.
Yeah. Why should I spend anything on you? You're a dog. And dogs in these days weren't your sweet little dog that comes wagging its tail. These are dogs that were living on the streets and just basically pretty vicious animals. Okay. So he's not said something nice about her. He says, "You're a dog. You dogs." I didn't come for the dogs. I came for the children. Who are the children?
The Jews.
The Jews, yeah. He says, "I came for them." What was her response?
Get the crumbs.
Yeah, great response. She says, "Yep, I'm a dog. But even the dogs get the crumbs that fall from the table from the children." What did that tell him about her?
She's receptive. As a receptive.
She didn't hope he could do it. She knew he could do it. She had faith. Is that what you just said, Clayton?
I said receptive. She's not too stubborn. It can be molded.
Yeah. But she had faith. She had faith that other people didn't have. He didn't even have to come. He didn't even have to come. Just say the word.
Amazing that she knew that he could do it.
Well, he made her.
And
She knew, yeah. "O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish." And you got to go to Matthew to find that because Mark didn't write it. So it was her faith that he responded to. It's our faith he responds to, isn't it? It's our heart and our faith that he responds to. Feeding the 4,000 as opposed to feeding the 5,000. Again, he went out from the region of Tyre and came through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee within the region of Decapolis. So now he's come back into Israel. They brought to him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they implored him to lay his hand on him. Jesus took him aside from the crowd by himself and put his fingers in his ears, and after spitting, he touched his tongue with the saliva. And looking up to heaven with a deep sigh, he said to him, "Paphratha," that is, be opened. So what's the man's problem? He couldn't hear, and because of that, he couldn't speak. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Helen Keller. Helen Keller had nothing wrong with her larynx, nothing wrong with her voice or anything like that, but she'd never heard a word in her entire life. So she couldn't speak because she couldn't hear. Now, Helen Keller was a little bit worse because she couldn't see either. She couldn't see her mouth, how it moved or anything like that in order to do it. But this man's problem was he couldn't hear. Because he couldn't hear, he couldn't speak very well because he really never had heard a spoken word. So what was Jesus' response? What does it tell you about the man? Who had faith?
The man did.
His friends.
His friends. Man didn't have faith. Man's standing there. He didn't know what's going on. They brought him to Christ and they said, "Heal him."
Okay, you're right. That's
But-
day.
He'd not heard a spoken word in his entire life. The people who had faith he could do something was the people who brought him. It wasn't based on the man's faith at all.
At the same time, he couldn't speak well anyway, so he wouldn't know anyway.
We couldn't speak well because he couldn't hear.
I know. So we don't know if he had faith or not.
Faith comes by
hearing.
hearing. He couldn't hear.
Necessarily, he can see.
It's what the scriptures say. Faith came by
But he
hearing.
can also see with his eyes.
So who brought the man most likely?
His
Friends.
His friends. What do you do that doesn't normally accompany a miracle?
He touched him.
Sorry, what?
He touched him.
He thanked him.
But it
Touched him
He looked up to heaven
with a sigh.
with a deep sigh. It was unusual. It was different. And his ears was open, and the impediment of his tongue was removed, and he began speaking plainly. And he gave them orders not to tell anyone. But the more he ordered them, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. They were utterly astonished, saying, "He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf and to hear and the mute to speak." I think if you bring back, in my mind, if you bring somebody back from the dead, that's more than helping those who are deaf to hear, but that's what they said. Why do you tell them, don't tell anyone? Why do you say that? Well, he didn't want anybody to know, but there's a reason he didn't want anybody to know. What would that be?
more people would come.
More people would be part of it that want, hey, hear me, heal me. It would have been more people. How much would it tend to accelerate the Pharisees and the Sadducees? the more they know about it. Wouldn't that tend to put more fuel on the fire? The more they knew about what he was doing? We really need to get rid of this guy. Too many people like him. Too many people want to follow him. How'd people comply?
Told everybody.
Yeah, they did the exact opposite. In those days, when there was again a large crowd and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come a great distance. And his disciples answered him, where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people? Why did he have compassion on the crowd?
Because they've been following for 3 days.
Yeah. By now, they're getting pretty hungry, aren't they? They haven't had food. If somebody had something, they evidently didn't have enough to share with 4,000 people, and there's probably 4,000 men. It's probably a lot more than 4,000. So what's the disciples' response, and why would that be frustrating for Christ?
They'd seen all these miracles, but yet they couldn't figure out where he's going to get the food from.
Yeah, they'd seen the miracles. Have we had this exact same situation before? Yeah. Which one? What was it? Sermon on the Mount? Who feeds how many? 5,000. Okay. Some say this is the same thing, but it's just a different number. I'll show you where I don't believe it is. And he was asking them, how many loaves do you have? And they said 7. And he directed the people to sit down on the ground, and taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks and broke them and started giving them to the disciples to serve them, and they served them to the people. They also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he ordered them to be served as well. And they ate and were satisfied. And they picked up the seven large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces. About 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. So what happens similar to the previous situation?
They had leftovers.
Yeah, baskets of leftovers. Not just, baskets that were more than what they started with, that were leftovers. So, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. And immediately he entered the boat with the disciples and came to the district of Dalmunta. The disciples came out and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. The Pharisees, I'm sorry. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given this generation. Leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. So he came to one area, and the Pharisees were there, and immediately they started asking him questions. So what did he do after he fed all the disciples and he fed the crowd?
He took off.
He took off. Yeah, got away from the crowds. Okay? So he gets off the boat on the other side, and who greets him? The Pharisees, to go start to pick at him again. So you can understand why he went to Tyre and Sidon, because he was wore out. And right back, he's in the middle of it again. But he replied to them, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times? An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign will be not given it except the sign of Jonah. And he left them and he went away. So he didn't really answer them straight out, but Matthew provides a little bit better understanding. Why do you think so? What does Matthew provide a little bit better understanding? Because I was reading out of Mark.
Well, because it's obvious. The signs, it's like the signs, it's kind of like saying the leaves are turning brown, so you know winter's coming.
Well, yeah. You know how to read physical things, right? If it's red in the morning, you're going to get storms during the day. If it's red at night, when it's setting, it's going to be okay. And I think that was kind of the old adage. Red at night, sailor's delight. Red in the morning, sailor take warning. Okay, so they knew how to read physical things and say, well, this is what's happening. But he says, you don't know how to read spiritual things. What he was saying is to say, you're not very spiritually minded because you don't understand and see what's going on. Haven't you seen all the miracles? Haven't you seen all the healing? Haven't you heard what I had to say and you can't figure out what's going on? So he did give him one sign. How's that a sign of Jesus? 3 days in the grave, just like Jonah was 3 days in the great fish. Wasn't a whale, it was a great fish. Same thing. He says, you're gonna see it, but when is that when they're gonna see it? It's gonna be after he's crucified. It's not gonna be before. At that particular time, some bells should ring. And they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. So now we're back to, he's gotten in the boat because he's sailing away from the Pharisees because he's tired of dealing with them. And he was giving orders to them saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. They began to cross with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Did you not see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? So you can see the frustration with Christ to say, didn't you hear what I just said? Didn't you see what just happened? Haven't we been together long enough that you understand? Are you that thick? He's frustrated. What's he warning the disciples of? The leaven of the Pharisees. What's the leaven of the Pharisees?
I think it's just the way they fight and argue, and it all gets intermingled and causes it to spread.
Yeah. Well, the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, you get a little bit of that, and everybody listens to it and says, well, you know, maybe they got something going there. Maybe there is something wrong here. And they just try and destroy things. And their hypocrisy spreads to everybody. They're all a bunch of hypocrites. He says, watch out for that. They'll turn you into a hypocrite, a complainer, a griper, a picker. Where's the mind of the disciples? Food, their stomach. When he said the leaven of the Pharisees, he says, see, we didn't bring enough bread. He's going, it's not what I'm talking about. So how does he respond to their thinking? It was me. It's like, what is wrong with you? Are you this thick? Do you not understand what I've been trying to teach you for the last 2 years? Haven't you seen what's going on? And you're talking about bread. He goes on. Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up? They said to him, 12. When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets of broken pieces did you pick up? And they said, 7. And he was saying to them, do you not understand? So there are two situations. And it's like, when I got into the second one, I'd gone like, oh, what we're going to do? What's his point? Have I wasted my time talking to you for the past 2 years? When are you going to understand? When do you become more spiritual and less physical? That's what he's talking to him about. That's his frustration. Why is he so frustrated?
I think because he's only got a year to go, what's it going to take to do what they're going to have to do?
Yeah. You figure, if you put yourself in the mind of Christ, that you're Christ, and you've picked these 12, and you know you've got a year or less here on this earth, and you've been trying for 2 years to bring these folks along to where they can carry on after you're gone, and they haven't gotten anywhere. You imagine that frustration? And they came to Bethesda, and they brought a blind man to see Jesus, imploring him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought them out of the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up. "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." Then again he laid his hands on his eyes and looked intently, and it was restored, and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. So, most likely, who do you think brought him? His friends, okay? They brought him from somewhere to this city because they knew he was going to be there. But it doesn't have too much where Christ did in this particular city. What did he have to do to heal the man? Put his hands on him, and he put his spit on his eyes, okay? On the other guy, he put spit on his ears, this one in his tongue. He put it on his tongue. He put his fingers in his ears. So he did something physical. So Peter's response. So we've seen all this. You have no healings except for that one in Bethesda that is recorded. Why do you think he told them to go back to his village? Don't go back to Bethesda. Just go back home. Because he didn't want everybody to know. He said, I didn't come here really to do this. I came here to teach. I came here to bring the good news. That's why he came. And he came to offer the perfect sacrifice. So Peter's inspired response. So at this particular point, Christ is as like I said, he's frustrated. He say, haven't you figured out who I am? Haven't you figured out what this is all about? Haven't you figured out this isn't an earthly kingdom at this particular point? So, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And he said to him, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So why is he asking the 12? At this particular point, why is he asking?
Trying to get their understanding to come forward. Where are they at?
Where are you at? Who do you think I am? Who do you think, who of others said I am? And the list that they go through is all the prophets, isn't it? And he says, sure, I've prophesied, but that's not the limit of what I am. The initial response was prophets. How did he redirect his question? Yeah. What do you think? Okay, this is what other people think. What do you think? Who do you think I am? So how did Peter answer? I'm sorry.
It's the right way.
the right way. Peter was right. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, okay, which is who he is. Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven." Then he warned the disciples that they should tell no one that he was the Christ. So, how did Peter come up with the right answer? It was given to him. Yeah, he was inspired. So what does Jesus say is the basis for his church, and how's it been misinterpreted?
God's word in the flesh.
Yeah,
It's God in the flesh.
yeah. Peter is the rock. Now, the confusion there is between the two words for rock in the original Greek. When Christ talks about in verse 18, he says, "And you are Peter, and upon this rock." Well, that rock there is Petra. It's a boulder. It's a huge rock. The word for Peter is Petra, which is little pebble, little stone. But what the interpretation is to say Peter is the one who is the basis of the church on the earth. That's been interpreted to be that way into the Catholic Church, or the Roman Universal Church. But that's not what Christ is saying. When he's saying, "And you're Peter." He says, "You're the Son of God." He says, "And you're Peter." And upon that rock, his declaration that says, "You are the Christ, the Son of God." He says, "Upon that rock, I will build my church." That's what he's saying, okay? And it's gotten kind of mixed up. But when you kind of separate it out to understand what the Greek is, you understand what he's really referring to. He's referring to himself as a rock. Does he refer to himself as a rock a lot? What other things did he refer to himself as far as a rock?
Same thing as that parable about a house built on God's word.
Yeah, built on, the song from VBS that we talk about, built on a rock on a solid foundation, as opposed to one on sand. He's also referred to as the cornerstone. Cornerstone is the first stone you lay in the foundation when you build a house. He's referred to in Daniel with the statue that was there that had the golden head and the silver torso and the brass part of the hips, and then the legs that were iron, and the stone that comes in and breaks all those kingdoms. He's that stone. His kingdom, represented by the stone, is greater than all the earthly kingdoms put together. So he's referred to over and over again as the cornerstone, or the stone, or the rock. And that's what he's talking about here, is upon that rock, upon that foundation of me, the Christ, the Son of God. That's what my church is going to be built on. So when will Peter use the keys? And which binding happens first? On the day of Pentecost. Which binding happens first? In heaven or on earth?
Heaven.
Heaven. So Peter's just reflecting what's in heaven to tell us what's on earth. Some people have said what Peter says on that day will be bound in heaven. No, that's backwards. What's already bound in heaven will now be bound on earth. In other words, what God said is right and what is wrong, it already exists in heaven and it already has. Peter will let everybody know what is right and what is wrong on the day of Pentecost, because the Spirit will inspire him. See how far I get. This is the beginning of 12. So in 2 weeks, we got through one lesson. That's pretty good. Jesus plainly states he is going to die. So up until this point, has he alluded to him being not staying with him? His death, his kingdom. When he talks about kingdoms, where are those kingdoms? They're not earthly, are they? But he's going to go plainly. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised up on the third day. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This shall never happen to you. But he turned to him and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. So as he told him before, it's been 2 years. He's told them parables, but he hasn't been really plain about it, where it really, really got to them. Remember when he said, you've got to eat of my flesh, you've got to drink of my blood? That's what they did with sacrifices. He was alluding to his death, but they didn't get it. So how's this different? It's plain. I'm going to go there. They're going to kill me. What's Peter thinking? Doesn't want him to die. What's their vision? That's the second bell. Huh?
He's going to be a king on earth.
Yeah, king on earth. How are you going to be a king on earth if you go die? That can't happen. You need to stay here with us. Why was his rebuke so harsh? And we'll end there. Why was the rebuke so harsh?
Because Peter was a leader.
Peter was a leader. Was that a temptation for Christ? What did he pray for in the Garden of Gethsemane? Let this cup pass from me. It was a temptation for Christ. He needed people to reinforce where he was going, not to be a stumbling block to get there. And he certainly needed the 12 to help him, which they didn't. But he needed that. We're going to stop here today and pick up on 12 next week. Thank you.